Hi everyone, it's Michael again with part 2 of my long ago promised review of my Makerfarm 8-inch Prusa i3 RepWrap 3D printer. Part 2 today, where I'm going to talk about the experience of building this printer. I had originally intended on my blog to have a very detailed build log where I talked about building each step and how it all went together. But it turns out that it was so straightforward and went together so quickly, even with a couple of little hiccups that I'll explain in just a minute, that I figured there really wasn't a whole lot of meat to put into a big blog post. So I'll just be talking about that real briefly and simply here. In general, the frame went together very nicely. As you can see, it is laser cut 1/4-inch Baltic birch plywood, so this is very good material for building. I did run into a little hiccup in that while building the X carriage right here, I'm sorry, the X motor mount, one of the sheets of plywood apparently was a little bit thicker than it was supposed to be, so the parts didn't fit together all that well. Now, I sent an email to Colin at Makerfarm, who was right on the spot about that, got back to me immediately, and sent me actually some replacement parts with the that were cut a little bit larger in order to accept the oversized parts. Now, of course, meantime, while those were on the way, I was impatient, and I came out to my shop and I laid down a sheet of 100 grit sandpaper, and I just sanded the parts down until they were the right thickness, and then they went together just beautifully. The only other hiccup with that, some of the screws were a little bit too short, and I was able to only get a little bit of thread engagement on them. I think that was partly because of the extra thick material. My solution to that, I went back to the same hardware store where I bought the glass from the heated bed, which cost me 84 cents. Or $1.68 for 2 of them. And I bought a box of number 6 screws, I'm sorry, number 6 bolts, and a box of number 6 nuts. And that was under $10, and then I used my wire cutters, which have a built-in hole where you can cut screws to size, and I just cut them to whatever size that was needed. Now, I have heard from Colin and from other Makerfarm customers that the thickness issue was a freak accident. That was a one-time thing. I would not expect to have to do that with any future kits. It sounds like Colin, who is a very, very good customer service-oriented business owner, I know is now paying extra attention and being extra careful about making sure that the stock that he uses is the right size. So I would think this is more a demonstration of customer service rather than what you can expect in any future kit purchases. Same thing with the hardware. I'm sure it's all going to be worked out. Colin's very conscientious about that. Way to go, Colin. A couple other little things that I discovered in the course of building this printer. One is on the X motor mount right here. You can see there are some slots here where you can adjust the motor, the position of the motor back and forth in order to set the tension on the X belt. Now, what I discovered, and I tried this with putting the bolt through on both ways, is that with the nut that is on the opposite end of this bolt back here actually holds the motor in the full outboard position. So you don't actually have any adjustment right there once you've got the hardware in place, but that's okay because what that's actually doing is holding this right where it needs to be. And of course you can make some adjustments with the when you go to set the length of your belt as well. So I would consider that a very minor problem with the build, and given the complexity of a RepWrap printer kit, if those are the only 2 things I have to complain about, then I'm way ahead of the game. There were a couple other little things in the design of this printer that I think could use a little bit of addressing, and guess what? I addressed them. One is on the right down here, if you can see it, this is the end stop for the Y-axis, and the original part that was in here, obviously you see there's a printed replacement here. I couldn't get the micro switch for the end stop to be close enough to where it contacts the bottom of the bed right here in order to get the end stop to stop the bed where I needed it to. It came a little bit further to where it was actually behind where the nozzle would home. So that was an easy enough fix. I designed this in OpenSCAD, and this is actually available on Thingiverse right now. If you're interested in printing that part, I'll make sure that there's a URL to it in the description of this video. The other, speaking of end stops, The other little flaw that I found could use some correction is right down here. This this bolt right here represents the contact point for the X end stop. And in the original design, this is just a hole that is cut in the wood with a screw that goes into it like so. And as you can see, it didn't take very long before that hole opened up enough that it doesn't really hold that bolt in place. So what I've done temporarily is just put a couple of nuts on this side of the, or on the outside of the this piece of laser cut plywood right here, so that it keeps the bolt from moving around too much. Now, in the future, I'm going to go ahead and probably find some solution that holds it in place so that it doesn't rattle around and it is held tightly. But that's working for now. Something similar is going on the Z-axis right here. You can see it's the same thing. There is a part already on Thingiverse where you can see there's a little printed part here that captures a nut, and then there's a spring and a couple of washers that you put in right there, and that actually, not only does it hold the end stop adjustment in place very well, it gives you a very, very fine control over exactly where that end stop goes. 1/8 of a turn is enough to make a noticeable difference. So that actually increases the precision of the stop, as well as making it a little bit stronger. So that's about all I can complain about as far as this build goes. I actually had a really good time building this printer. There was just enough challenge and just enough problems that needed to be solved that it just really made me feel accomplished, and it made me feel happy, and it was fun without being discouraging. So overall, I thoroughly enjoyed this build. So for design, for build quality, ease of build, and all those other things that you want from a kit for a 3D printer, I'm giving this one also a 9 out of 10. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you in part 3.